December 17, 1944. The Ardennes forest is a frozen labyrinth of white and shadow. Wind howls through shattered pines, sweeping snow across the narrow roads where engines groan in protest. A lone U.S. Army fuel truck crawls forward, its headlights off, its tires sinking into drifts that swallow the path ahead. Inside, the driver's gloved hands grip the wheel so tight his knuckles ache. His breath fogs the windshield. Behind him, in steel drums, sloshes the lifeblood of an army, high-octane gasoline meant for Sherman tanks stranded miles ahead, their crews freezing and waiting for a miracle. Radio silence has been ordered. The maps are useless. Every mile could be his last. Yet he keeps driving, because somewhere ahead, a single delivery will decide the fate of the entire battle. The Battle of the Bulge began on December 16, 1944, when more than 200,000 German troops and 1,000 armored vehicles punched through the fog-shrouded forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. It was Adolf Hitler's last desperate gamble in the West, an attempt to split the Allied front, capture the port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace before Germany collapsed. The plan relied on surprise, speed, and above all, fuel. The German armored spearheads surged through the snow with frightening momentum. Villages fell within hours, Allied positions were overrun, and entire regiments vanished into the mist. American commanders were caught off guard, radio lines failed, supply columns scattered. The Ardennes, quiet and lightly defended, became a trap. For the Allies, every gallon of gasoline became more valuable than gold. The rapid advance across France had already stretched their supply system thin. Fuel depots were emptying faster than convoys could refill them. And now, under relentless snow and artillery fire, those same convoys faced destruction. A single lost truck could mean an immobilized tank battalion. A single missed delivery could mean the difference between defense and annihilation. By nightfall on the second day of the offensive, the U.S. First Army's supply situation was dire. Depots near Spa, Stavelot, and Trois-Ponts were under threat. Engineers blew up bridges to keep them from German hands, but that also trapped American transport behind the lines. In that chaos, scattered fuel trucks roamed aimlessly through the forest, each one carrying enough gasoline to change the outcome of the battle. The winter of 1944 was the coldest Europe had seen in decades. Temperatures fell below freezing, engines seized, and men froze in their foxholes. Snow muffled sound, turning the Ardennes into a world of silence broken only by the distant thunder of artillery. Inside that frozen maze, logistics, not firepower, became the deciding weapon. The Allied armies relied on a fragile lifeline of trucks known as the Red Ball Express, a vast convoy system that had fueled the breakout from Normandy. These drivers, many of them African-American servicemen, had spent months hauling fuel, ammunition, and rations from depots on the French coast to the front lines. They drove through bomb craters, sleet, and exhaustion. But in the chaos of the Bulge, even this disciplined network fractured. German commandos disguised as American MPs redirected convoys down false roads. Bridges were blown, road signs switched, and radio frequencies jammed. Whole fuel columns vanished into the forest, some ambushed, others forced to abandon their cargo. The Germans knew that without fuel, American armor could not move, and without movement, the front would crumble. But the Germans were equally desperate. Their tanks, the powerful Panthers and Tigers, drank gasoline faster than it could be captured. Every mile deeper into Allied territory drained their reserves. Hitler's offensive was built on a ticking clock of dwindling fuel. It was into this chaos that one truck drove alone, carrying a full load of high-octane aviation fuel intended for armored units near Stavelot. Somewhere in that blizzard, its driver took a wrong turn, and that mistake would halt the advance of an entire German corps. Behind every armored thrust and artillery barrage, there were men who never fired a weapon, truck drivers, mechanics, and loaders who moved the lifeblood of war. In December 1944, they became the backbone of survival. The Red Ball Express had already proven that the U.S. Army's greatest weapon wasn't just its tanks or planes, it was its ability to move them. Now, under snow and shellfire, those same men faced a nightmare. Most drove without escorts. Their trucks, loaded with gasoline, were mobile bombs. If hit, they vanished in fireballs that lit up the night sky. Still, they kept driving. They wrapped their frozen hands in rags, followed faint tire tracks, and prayed the next bend didn't hold an ambush. For many, there was no glory, only the responsibility to deliver. Their courage didn't come from orders, but from endurance. The German plan, Operation Whacked am Rhein, depended on capturing Allied fuel depots rather than hauling their own supplies. German intelligence estimated they could seize at least 3 days' worth of fuel in the opening advance, enough to reach the Meuse River. But by relying on enemy stockpiles, they gambled everything on speed. To make that happen, Hitler unleashed his elite armored units, Kampfgruppe, 5th Panzer Army and 6th SS Panzer Army, through narrow forest roads. They moved fast, overrunning U.S. outposts and scattering defenders, yet every attack cost them fuel they couldn't replace. When American engineers blew up bridges near Trois-Ponts, the German spearheads were trapped, just short of the Allied depots they needed most. Fuel was running out on both sides. In the chaos, a single surviving truck still moved somewhere in the snow, carrying what neither army could afford to lose. By the 3rd day of the offensive, German tank crews were counting every liter. Reports from Kampfgruppe, the most feared armored column of the campaign, told of Panthers being abandoned mid-road, their engines dry, their crews ordered to siphon fuel from wrecks. Soldiers pushed vehicles by hand, dragging barrels through knee-deep snow. The powerful Wehrmacht, once symbol of precision and strength, now crawled on empty tanks. For Paper's men, the mission was clear: capture Allied fuel or die trying. They raided depots, seized drums from U.S. convoys, even poured gasoline from civilian cars. But every mile they gained without refueling tightened their own noose. Their blitzkrieg had outrun its lifeline. While Paper's tanks stalled, one American fuel truck kept moving through the same forest. Its driver had missed a turn near Stavelot, following the wrong signpost, a marker likely switched by German saboteurs. That single mistake sent him directly into the path of history. Lost low on fuel himself, he pressed on through snow so thick it erased his tire tracks behind him. Hours later, headlights flickered ahead, an isolated U.S. position barely holding its line. The truck rolled in, its arrival almost unbelievable. The men there hadn't seen supplies in 2 days. Their Sherman tanks were silent, frozen, defenseless. Within an hour, the truck's fuel was being pumped into the vehicles that would meet Paper's column head-on. Across the battlefield, German tanks sat powerless. On the American side, engines roared back to life. One side's fuel starvation had become the other's salvation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide not just a road or a village, but the entire momentum of the war. The snow stopped falling just before dawn. The forest was quiet again, broken only by the groan of engines waking from the cold. At a makeshift outpost near Trois-Ponts, a handful of American tankers watched their Shermans cough, sputter, and finally roar to life. Diesel smoke hung in the frozen air like victory itself. They had fuel again, barely enough for a few hours of movement, but enough to fight. The fuel truck that saved them was already empty, its driver slumped against the steering wheel, exhausted but alive. No one had expected him, no one knew his name, but his arrival transformed a static, frozen defense into a mobile counterforce. Moments later, the first scouts reported movement in the tree line. The armored vanguard of Kampfgruppe, the 1st SS Panzer Division, advancing fast and low. They were hunting fuel, and they were only a few kilometers away. American commanders gave the order. The Shermans rolled out from the village, their engines rumbling through the white mist. They took up ambush positions on a ridgeline overlooking the road. Machine guns were loaded, turrets locked, then silence. Through the haze, the lead German tank appeared, a Panther blackened by soot, followed by half-tracks and infantry. They didn't expect resistance here. They thought the Americans had already retreated. When the first Sherman fired, its shell struck the Panther dead center. Flames tore through its hull. Chaos erupted. In seconds, the road became a killing zone. American tanks, refueled by that one truck, unleashed a storm of fire. The German advance, built on speed and surprise, met an enemy it thought was out of gas. And in that blinding clash of steel and fire, the entire momentum of the Battle of the Bulge began to turn. The battle raged for hours along the snow-choked road between Stavelot and Trois-Ponts. German tanks tried to push forward, their turrets swiveling through the trees, but the terrain turned against them. The roads were narrow, the curves steep, and every engine burned what little fuel remained. Their panthers and tigers, monsters of armor and firepower, were trapped in a forest designed for lighter machines. The Americans, freshly refueled, fought like men reborn. The Shermans darted between the trees, using mobility as their shield. Each tank carried the lifeblood delivered by that lone truck, every gallon translating into another burst of defiance. When the Germans tried to flank, they found bridges blown and fields mined. When they tried to withdraw, they discovered their own tanks could no longer move. By midday, Paper's column had stalled completely. What had begun as a lightning thrust toward the Meuse was now a stationary target. German crews abandoned vehicles that could no longer be fed. Panthers were left idling until their tanks ran dry, then destroyed to prevent capture. More than 100 armored vehicles, engines silent, crews freezing, lay scattered through the Ardennes snow. American artillery found the stalled column and opened fire. What fuel the Germans still had turned their tanks into torches. The forest glowed orange through the smoke. The enemy's advance, once feared as unstoppable, was burning itself to ashes. By nightfall, reports filtered back to Allied command. Paper halted, German armor immobilized. The breakthrough had failed. A single fuel delivery, misdirected by fate and driven through terror, had reached its destination. And because it had, an entire German corps ran out of strength. The Battle of the Bulge's turning point was not marked by glory, but by gasoline. When dawn rose over the frozen hills on December 19, 1944, the once mighty Kampfgruppe paper was no longer advancing. Its tanks stood motionless in the snow, their crews huddled beside them for warmth. The dream of a breakthrough to the Meuse had died where the engines stopped turning. All along the front, similar stories unfolded. German armored units, starved of fuel, abandoned hundreds of vehicles. Many were destroyed by their own men to avoid capture. Others simply froze in place, silent monuments to a failed offensive. For the first time since the attack began, the German timetable collapsed. Momentum, the essence of blitzkrieg, had vanished. At the same hour, American convoys restarted across the region. Reinforced by restored fuel flow, artillery regained its voice. Supply officers noted one sector, Stavelot Trois-Ponts, as unexpectedly stable. The reason remained buried in the chaos. A single delivery that had arrived when all others failed. The front was holding, and Hitler's final gamble was beginning to unravel. By December 22, the last spark of German momentum had faded. Paper's forces, surrounded and out of fuel, destroyed what remained of their tanks before retreating on foot through the forest. More than 100 armored vehicles, including Tigers and Panthers, were left behind, some still loaded with ammunition but empty of fuel. Their blackened shells dotted the snow, marking the spot where Hitler's final offensive had frozen to death. For the Allies, that stalled column symbolized a turning tide. Reinforcements poured in from Patton's Third Army, smashing through the encirclement at Bastogne. What had begun as a desperate winter defense became the beginning of Germany's end in the West. Later reports noted that entire sectors survived on just a handful of successful fuel runs, one of which near Trois-Ponts had arrived by error. No hero medals were issued, no names recorded, but historians agree, without that unexpected supply, Paper's armored spearhead might have reached the Meuse. Instead, it ran dry in the snow. Fuel, not firepower, had decided the outcome. Wars are often remembered for the thunder of artillery, the courage of generals, or the banners raised in victory. But history is just as often turned by smaller things, by a wheel that keeps spinning, an engine that refuses to die, or a driver who does not turn back. In the Ardennes, amid snow and silence, a single truckload of gasoline did what divisions could not. It gave movement to men who were frozen in place. It gave strength where only exhaustion remained. That one act, unplanned and unseen, helped stop 1,000 German tanks, and with them Hitler's final hope of reversing the war. The driver's name was never recorded. His story, like those of thousands of supply men and mechanics, faded into the background of greater battles. Yet without them, those battles would never have been won. Because sometimes victory is not about heroism, it's about persistence. And sometimes the war is saved not by the man who fires first, but by the one who keeps driving when the road disappears.